Welcome to Careers in Discovery, your window into the world of biotech leaders. On each episode, we interview the industry's leading executives to understand how they built their careers, what they've learned along the way, and the advice they'd give to their younger selves. This week on Careers in Discovery, I'm joined by Peter Pack, an influential figure in the biotech industry with a career spanning over 2 decades. Peter's journey has taken him from Germany to the UK, where he now operates as a strategic partner and advisor to private equity firms and startups. Peter shared with us his experience as a CEO and his current role mentoring young biotech teams. He offered insights into the differences between the biotech sectors in Germany and the UK, the importance of building strong networks, and his passion for supporting innovative startups. He also told us about his early inspirations in science, the development of groundbreaking technology at Morphosys, and the lessons he's learned about commercialization and strategic decision making. Come and listen for all this and a whole lot more. I'm delighted this week on Careers in Discovery to be joined by Peter Pack. Peter, welcome to the show.
Yeah, thanks a lot. It's a pleasure.
It's fantastic to have you on. And normally I start these things by saying Peter Pack of a certain thing that you're working on, but you're working on lots of different things. It'd be great to hear a bit about what you're up to at the moment and where you're spending your time.
It's a bit diverse. That's true. I mean, first, I'm back in the UK. Quite happy about that. So I worked in the UK a couple of years in the past, pre-Brexit.
Yes.
I was a bit frustrated with all that, went back to Germany. It turned out all a bit too boring in my home country because it's a different kind of industry here. It's much more dynamic, much better kind of networking opportunities. You have here many more lawyers, investors, serial entrepreneurs, and it's so fruitful to meet these people, which are kind of similar to my background. Because unfortunately in Germany, we don't have so many serial entrepreneurs. Our life science industry in general is much smaller than in the UK. It started at the same size in the 90s when I started my career. And I started it in Munich. And then Munich was actually bigger for 2-3 years as Cambridge or London or so. But UK people learned a lot from that. I mean, we had delegations coming to Munich, learning about how to foster these companies, how to give them grants and rooms and incubators. And in the end, the British biotech industry was growing much faster than the German one. So there was always more, as we say in German, music. So where's the music? And the music in biotech in Europe, and I would now say UK as part of Europe, is certainly in the Golden Triangle. I mean, you have also other really interesting locations. You have Wales, so I'm chairman of Antiverse, which is located in Wales. But you have the Golden Triangle, but you have also Bristol and Newcastle and a lot of good locations. So bottom line, I'm back in the UK, living in London now.
Fantastic.
And what I'm doing is I'm a kind of a freelancer now, so more on the non-operative side of things. After I had been CEO for nearly 20 years, a long time.
Yes.
And now my main activities, I'm a strategic partner of a big private equity fund called Archimed in France. Also a senior advisor of a German private equity company. But in general, I'm kind of supporting also startups, mentoring management, helping them to avoid mistakes I did, and I did a lot as a CEO.
Sure.
So I'm, for instance, in boards of companies, currently chairman of the company Antiverse. Antiverse is an AI and discovery company located in Wales. And so that's something I like to do, is supporting young teams. For the investors, I usually help them finding acquisition targets.
Right, yes.
Doing due diligences, looking into IP, looking into the competitive market space, based on my own experience in the life science industry, because most investors in Europe don't have an own operative experience.
Yes.
Which is a bit of a weakness in Europe compared to the US, where investors have usually serial entrepreneurs in their teams. Whereas here, that's a kind of a weakness. So I always have a different view on industries, on companies, on teams than a usual investor would have. So I'm a bit of a kind of, it's a different voice in the industry.
Yeah, absolutely. But it sounds like, you found a blend of things that really speak to what you're interested in and speak to your what gets you excited about the work that you
And
do.
the good thing is, before I worked mostly as a CEO and as a board member. And as a CEO, I mean, you work 24/7 on putting out fires.
Yeah.
Your board expects you to think about strategy and so the entire day. And actually you don't. You have just a few hours in front of a board meeting where you start to think about that, because you are just busy with all these other things. And if you take a step back and you work for investors, I make, for instance, market analyses for the biologics market, ADC market, or so, from my point of view, from my experience, you suddenly look into many more companies. You start to understand trends in the business much better, as if you would be in your little silo as a CEO. Obviously, as a CEO, you know your competition and so on. You know your technology platform, your competitors. It's all fine, but you lack this overall view of the industry. You sometimes you don't see big trends, and that is something I can do now, because I'm working on these kind of projects. So a private equity firm like Archimate would ask me, so give us the most important trend in biotechnology.
Yeah.
I would come up, I do some research, look into companies, reading articles, and would give them my view of things, which is always a bit different than most other people's view is.
Yes.
But sometimes they find it helpful, sometimes not.
Yeah.
But I have my own view, and the good thing is you have stepped back, and you can also bring really different types of people together. So, for instance, what I learned, and I was really surprised, because in the past I worked as a VC for 2.5 years, investing into companies, and I always was not the typical VC, because my view is always a bit different. But now working also with private equity, which is more looking into profitable service product-oriented companies, I found out that most of them, even the specialized life science ones, they don't look into the stages before they have a certain interest in the companies. So what most private equity people doing, they have these big databases, they pay a lot of money for that, and they look for companies in a certain area, CDMOs, and then they look, what is their EBIT, so what's their profit?
Yes.
And then they look further. But the point is that they're all doing it. And if you just look into the numbers, they all end up with finding the same target.
The same companies,
if then the company is on the market, you suddenly have 5 or 8 or 10 private equity funds competing. And my view is, hey guys, you should look 3 years earlier, 3 years before you have an EBIT of 10 million. And then you look into the company, analyze it, you look into the market space and the competitor space, and just watch the companies over time. And you go a bit earlier than the others into these companies. And then you find bargains. You will inevitably find bargains, because for biotech, so burning money, it's so difficult to find money. On the other hand, private equity guys don't have lots of problems to raise huge funds.
No.
But sometimes they don't know where to invest it. And there's a mismatch between private equity and venture capital, I think.
Yes.
So what I'm also doing is just simply bringing people together, different kinds of investors, with companies, saying, look, this is a company which is not yet profitable, but they have probably the best product in this area, or a medical device or something, and just make a contact, talk to them. Also, because private equity sometimes doesn't have the best reputation, but show you are real people, you are interested in the business, you will help to grow it. And so that's really fruitful, to bring now several types of people who usually don't speak a lot,
Yes.
just on one table. And so that's really something which benefits a lot of purposes.
Yeah.
So I really like that work. I mean, it's really exciting for me. And usually, I don't earn money by doing that, bringing different people together. But that I see these people from different worlds talking to each other and maybe helping to get some funding or to get a company sold. So that's fun. I mean, that's really excitement for me.
Yeah, absolutely.
So that's the kind of things I'm doing.
No, interesting. And I think the point that you make around if private equity get involved earlier, I think is an interesting one from a founders and leaders perspective as well, isn't it? Because, there'd be real attraction in saying, okay, well, look, don't worry about raising a Series B. Don't worry about doing any of that. We'll do a deal now and you won't have to raise money again. And then we'll help you take it to the market. I think there's probably a lot of CEOs out there who would think
there
sounds
would be some
that sounds good. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, you have to fulfill certain prerequisites.
Yes. Yeah.
That means if you have 3 preclinical programs and you need 200 million to get it to phase 2 or so, that's not typical private equity.
Yes.
But lots of companies will have a service offering, a medical device, something which, if you do it right and you commercialize it right in the right way, and private equity could really help with that.
Yeah.
So my background is a bit kind of a dual thing because I helped to start biotech companies and to grow them and to restructure them. But I also had companies profitable. I mean, really selling reagents, selling products, selling medical devices. And I went out with a little suitcase myself, talking to doctors or owners of clinics. And commercialization is a completely different kind of thing. And unfortunately, in the biotech industry, 90% of all the biotech founders have no idea how to commercialize a product.
Yes.
So, and private equity, on the other hand, they are specialists in that. So they can help you building a sales team, going into several countries, supporting growth of your subsidiaries there, making contact to big customers. So in the past, I had been, for instance, a board member of a company called Polyplus Transfection.
Yes.
I came into contact with him in 2015, transfection reagent company. At that time, really small. I helped Archimed to invest, to grow as a board member. Just you support them, you make suggestions, how to build a business in the US, how to have sales reps, key accounts, and all of that. And actually, the company grew fantastically well. And it was sold in 2020 after 5 years of being on the board for an amazing multiple by the support of private equity, by the team of Archimed, by the private equity people, really helped them to expand their sales organization, also to position the products in a bit of a different way. So going more to high quality products and all of that. And that led to a huge increase of revenues. And without the support, in this case, of Archimed, that would not have been a success case.
Yes.
So you see the benefit of a really experienced investor with lots of network people to grow the business, to invest growth capital. So, but unfortunately, some private equity firms have the reputation of just squeezing out and so on. That exists, but in the life science industry, it's a bit different.
Yes, of course.
And if you have such a supportive investor, and I try to help them bring companies together with investors, and that is really fruitful.
Yeah, absolutely, and gets you to see lots of very interesting science, I'm sure, and very interesting new technologies.
And you meet fantastic people. I mean, also one of my drivers is. So maybe you're familiar with this Japanese term of ikigai. Ikigai is why you get up in the morning. I mean, what's the purpose of your life? And it's so exciting for me to meet amazing people. And you have amazing people on the early biotech side. You have amazing academia people, and you have really impressive investors. And so for me to see and learn, that's a real driver.
Yeah, fantastic. And I want to talk about your journey to this point, Peter, and I'm really interested in your sort of tenure as a CEO. As you said, you did it for 20 years. You did it in lots of different organizations, and particularly, I'm particularly interested in how people develop as CEOs, how they become a better CEO, what the things people, and there's lots of different ways to do it, of course. But before we get to that, I'd really be interested in talking about the origins of your career, I guess, because you were a scientist by training, you were a biologist,
No, actually a chemist.
a chemist. Sorry,
Yeah, because
sorry.
in Germany at that time, so you had to be a chemist to be manager of a company.
Ah,
I mean,
okay,
that's a German heritage of chemistry pharma,
I see.
and biologists wouldn't be accepted at that time. It all changed, but I had
Yes.
to study chemistry to get into biochemistry.
I see. Okay. So you were trained as a chemist, and then obviously pursued this career initially in R&D and in developing
Yeah.
R&D programs. Tell us a bit about, I suppose, to start with, why science, why chemistry, and then why drug development, and what led you down that path in the first place, do you think?
Yeah, that's quite interesting. Why? I mean, for me, it was never a question that I would not become a scientist.
Hmm.
I mean, I just recalled I was 8 years, 8 years of age, and we had vacations in the Netherlands, and somebody had the idea to drive to a kind of museum there. It's in Eindhoven, Philips Museum of Science called
Mm.
the Evoluon, and this Evoluon looks like a UFO.
Okay.
And that was my first contact with science, actually, because it was kind of a science museum. And I was unbelievably flashed by being there. I mean, as a really young kid.
Mm.
And I mean, it took me weeks to calm down. I found that so super interesting. And I also became a big fan of science fiction. I mean,
Right.
starting, with the French writers and so of the 19th century, but then, going more to the present day writers, Arthur C. Clarke or
Hmm.
Lem or all these people. And I was a bit of a nerd. I'm still one. And I was reading science fiction every day. So basically
Right.
1 to 2 books a day. So for
Right.
me, that was my world. And so I always have seen the world as the reality as it is, but there are other potential realities which might
Hmm.
even be better. And so I always questioned, do we have to do stuff like this?
Right.
And for me, the most difficult thing, also working in companies, especially if you work for a big established company, you would come in and have some ideas how to change it, how to improve things,
Yes.
how to start novel product lines or anything. And the worst thing, which happened to me a couple of times, is people say, "Yeah, but we did that since 20 years that way. We will not change it,"
Mm-hmm.
and that kills me.
Yeah.
I would always ask myself, is there a more efficient way to do things? Because maybe I'm a bit lazy, but based on this laziness, I found more optimized procedures to do things.
Right.
So I rather thought about how to have a better process to address this problem than to start doing it the old way, like all other people would do it. I would
Mm-hmm.
not be differentiated if I would do it like every other guy would do it.
Yes.
So I first thought, oh, is there maybe a better way to do things? And that started in the lab. So I first had to study chemistry, then became a biochemist and tried to find my way into molecular biology.
Hmm.
So, and then I had a couple of tasks. So I started my PhD work in the antibody industry. Basically, at that time, it wasn't an antibody industry.
Yeah.
Academia group. I was at the Max Planck Institute in Martinsried. And a couple of things. I have had a few objectives and didn't want to do it like all the other failed PhDs before. So I needed to do it differently. I had different views and ideas as a chemist to address a certain problem, like
Hmm.
increased binding strength of an antibody or a fragment in an ELISA. I wasn't able to improve the affinity of it, but I said, look, we kind of built a chelator. It's basically having multiple binding sites binding at the same time, which solved the problem. Nobody
Yes.
thought otherwise before. Nobody had this idea. Now it's obvious, and people go to multivalent fragments. But but I solved the problem by doing that. And since I had to design these fragments and build it completely new artificial proteins in the early 90s, quite early,
Right.
I came up with a system of oligos I could combine in a modular way to genes. Now, this is all standard now, and you can order that from companies. But at that time, it wasn't. You had to do everything yourself. You had to order oligos. You had to purify them. Awful. So I tried to do it in the most efficient way. And so I did it in a modular way. And 2 years later, this became one of the foundations of the company, Morphosys. Because during my PhD time, there were a guy coming from Cambridge and starting a new company. He wanted to start a new company in Munich because Cambridge was already tapped all these opportunities. Professors had their companies. So he came Simon Moroney, now retired CEO of Morphosys, basically before the company started. And he wanted to find a few people who would have strange ideas how to start a company.
Right.
Now he talked to my PhD mentor, and then we were 2 or 3 people and sat together. And so, what can we do? I mean, what would be differentiated to companies like Cambridge Antibody Technology, which already was existing for 2 or 3 years? They had lots of IP around, building antibody libraries. So most of my life, I worked with antibodies. And at that time, so we said, oh, it would be great to have an antibody library. But we didn't have these geniuses like John McCafferty or so. So we had to come up with something else, something different. And I said, look, why wouldn't we do a synthetic library? Because they had an IP on PCR out of human donors. And I said, okay, we can't do that. They have patent application on that. So why not doing the entire stuff gene synthetically? So not using a PCR out of human donors.
Yes, I see.
And because of my former approach to be quite efficient to build new construct, and that was part of this novel thing we created. We called it UCAL, Human Combinatorial Antibody Library. We started work in 1992. So this is more than 30 years ago.
Yes.
And it was several, so I was not the only inventor. Achim Knappig, he came up with, we're using certain germline sequences of antibodies. We are building several libraries, combining them. So lots of ideas came from 2 or 3 people. We put it together and we created it over 3 years. An amazing time. I mean, nowadays a biotech company would not have 3 years to create something like a technology platform. We had, Simon Moroney was able to organize lots of money. And so these were the early years. I was super excited to be part of that. I felt this is my baby. I wasn't the official founder, but for me, the company was also my baby.
Yes.
And so we did the entire stuff gene synthetically. I mean, several kilobases we synthesized by hand, which nowadays takes a week.
Right.
But what we created was pretty unique. And this library, which was created in the early 90s, is still a gold standard in antibody discovery. So it's existing since then. I mean, company improved it further, made it bigger and so on, but the basic principle, and it has made revenues of more than 1 billion.
Wow.
Actual money, not biobucks.
Yes.
And for instance, it's used by BioRad, and also I developed automation around that, so you have less hands-on time. And also that is used by BioRad. So if you order antibody reagent from BioRad, you're using the technology I developed with others 30 years ago.
Okay.
So it's still a kind of a gold standard. But the point is a bit, are there other ways to do it? So we could have done a kind of a copy of what CAT was doing and pray that hopefully they will not sue us. I mean, they sued us in the end.
Right.
And the companies spent several years in court because of that, because they said, oh, Peter used PCR. And I said, yeah, but it's not PCR to human donor. So lots of fights. But in the end, I mean, Cambridge Antibody Technology with Humira is the success story of library-based antibody discovery. Whereas for Morphosys, we created hundreds, thousands of reagents, and also several which are either in diagnostic use or therapeutic use, are in the clinic. But so we had this really interesting competition, and I loved that. I mean, that was a pivotal moment The only thing which I didn't like is at that time, since we were not people who applied it, we were not clinicians. Actually, we didn't have any idea which are good targets.
Okay.
And that was a bit of a problem. So we did an IPO, and I said, look, I'm doing antibodies against everything on Earth, but what is it I should generate antibodies against? And kind of, what is a good target? We don't really know. We are not MDs, we don't know that. So I was a bit frustrated. And after the IPO, I took the money and I co-started a diagnostic company which used antibodies, but to detect biomarkers for early cancer detection. That company we called MTM Laboratories. I built it up over as a CEO, as a founding CEO over 10 years. We first identified biomarkers, then got access to clinical samples and developed a real kit. So something gynecologists and cytologists could take, identify early cancer cells in a certain sample, histology, cytology. And we started to commercialize it. So that was my first contact to selling stuff.
Yes.
And we sold it eventually after a few years in several countries, so European countries, not the UK, because UK was seen as difficult because of the nice Nice committee.
Yes.
But we sold it in France, Germany, Spain, also in the US, was some success in the US. We relocated the company to the US after 10 years with products in the market, certified products. And after a year in the US, it got much higher valuation from potential acquirers, and it was sold.
Right.
So, but it was a fully integrated company, and there are not too many in Germany. I mean, it was a diagnostic company, so with a therapeutic company, it's much more difficult, fully integrated. But you don't have many examples that a startup would go the entire way. We did even manufacturing in-house. We assembled the kits, and we had the warehouse, and we sent it out.
Yes.
And that was a quite interesting experience.
So you had to learn a lot to run that company from a commercial point of view, from a manufacturing.
Unfortunately, I didn't have any mentor, so we made lots of mistakes. I mean, awful. I mean, in retrospect, I said awful. And unfortunately, in Germany, we don't have this system between mentor and so on. I mean, we don't really have that. And people would not admit they don't know how to do it.
Okay.
It's a bit of a problem. So you learn it the hard way.
Yes.
The problem is you lose a lot of time. And that's what I learned. I mean, and I try to support now startups, also to raise money, to do deals, to avoid the typical mistakes everybody is doing.
Yes.
I mean, not focused enough, technology, no idea where to apply it, completely busy presentations, nobody understands it. They don't find investors because they don't have the right pitch. They have difficulties to talk to pharma companies because pharma companies don't understand what the best application of this platform is. I mean, that's all common problems and challenges. But if you have done it a few times, you avoid certain mistakes.
Yeah, of course.
And it's relatively easy for me, because I've done it so often, to tell somebody, no, you can't use the presentation. If I would give the presentation, I would do it completely different, much simpler. I mean, 4 bullet points and so on, and not full of graphs and everything, which most people do. It's a simple example. But most do this mistake.
No, I mean, absolutely.
Or how would you negotiate with a pharma company that you're not ripped off early and so on. So that's stuff I'm doing. So after that, after this diagnostic company was sold, I also, because I had this little bit of sales experience, I got the offer to be CEO of a German ophthalmology company selling medical devices, medical implants, so completely different, was nothing related to antibodies. But I enjoyed it as well because the owner, it was family owned, and the owner said, look, Peter, I understand you had been a biotech CEO, you sold, or your company sold diagnostic kits, but selling is something completely different. I said, what do you mean? He said, no, half of your time you visit our most important customers. I said, what do you mean visiting them? That you take the little suitcase with samples, you go to the doctor's office at 8 o'clock in the morning. I said, oh, wait a minute. I mean, I had been CEO, right? I still I'm CEO. He said, no. You have to learn the way. I mean, I joined salespeople, experienced salespeople, and learned that selling is so much different from. I thought maybe selling products is like doing a funding round. So you give a little pitch or so. And then, sales rep would say, oh, no, Peter, don't do this. I mean, I gave pitch, for instance, oh, we have now this fantastical artificial lens, with a certain surface and certain optical features, and the best way you can get it into the eye and so on. And the sales rep would say, no.
Yeah.
Don't talk about that to the doctor. I said, yeah, but the doctor is the surgeon who implants it. I said, no, they don't want to discuss that.
Yes.
I mean, you build kind of relationships to these people, and they assume that you will have okay products.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so in the end, you build a relationship, and then they say, oh, by the way, I buy 1,000 of these implants. It's so different from what biotech people usually think. And it's a little bit about innovation, but not only. And the biggest problem I see also when I'm doing due diligences, the founders hardly ever talk to a potential customer. They would usually say, oh, this is so fantastic. It's so much better than any other product on the market.
Right.
It will sell itself.
Right.
And then, I would ask, so what are the revenue expectations you have in 3 years' time? They would say, oh, at least 50 million. I say, okay, so what is the payroll? What's the size of the sales team? Yeah, 3 people. There's a complete, utter disconnect.
Yes.
And actually also most of the investors, I mean, especially the venture capital investors, don't know about that.
Right, yeah.
Because the venture capital investors are usually in a stage of a company where there's nothing to sell.
No, yeah.
But sometimes they have a company which successfully develops something, and then they don't know. I mean, nobody can help them. Nobody would find in the budget, this is totally bonkers, because you can't have 50 million revenues with three salespeople. It's impossible. It's just impossible.
No.
So that is the kind of the extra experience I would bring to the table if I do due diligences. Also, how to position a product. Is it more on the cheap, the mass thing side? Is it more the kind of a premium product for certain applications? And so you have to think hard about positioning of products. And it's not selling itself because it's innovative. No, it's not.
No, not at all. Yeah, and it's interesting.
So I had this. I learned selling by also talking to lots of customers.
Yes.
And it was highly profitable company. I had to sell the entire company to private equity. Went to London, UK, my first UK job. A much bigger company, LGC Standards, one of the market leader in Europe for reference materials. 400 people, 100 sales reps, 26 subsidiaries at the time.
Right.
A bit of a stressful job, I have to say.
I can imagine.
And a bit the more conservative approach selling things. Because that company exists since many years. And so it was a bit of an uphill battle, actually, to change mentalities and so on. After some time, I said, look, maybe it's better I become an investor. So I got the offer to become a partner of a seed fund back in Heidelberg, where my family still lived, because the diagnostic company I founded was also in Heidelberg.
Right.
And so, oh, fine. So became investor, wanted to invest in a few companies, also realized my view in companies is just different from the typical VC.
Yes, I see.
My understanding of the issues of the management is different from a typical VC.
Yeah.
And I would select different companies than most of the VCs do. Also, I was told that, but all these big funds now go into that in that area, microbiome, right, for instance. And I said at that time, that's something I never fully understood. And I said, but explain to me what the product is. I mean, what the pharma partnership is about and all of that. And, we don't know, but everybody invests into microbiome. And I said, look, I'm not a microbiome expert. I can't really tell you whether it's a good investment or not. But because I don't understand that, I wouldn't invest. I would more invest into a company and in neurology field. And then they say, oh, no, nobody goes there because, clinical trials take too long. And so I said, yeah, but if there's a real medical need and there's a real innovative approach like tinnitus or something, I would favor that. And I managed to invest in a Cambridge company, Crescendo Biologics.
Yeah.
And Crescendo Biologics was special from my view because I always was interested in multi-specificity.
Yes.
Something I was 30 years too early. I mean, even in my PhD work, I worked on that. But nobody had any idea for what to use it.
Yes.
I mean, they said, oh, it's just, it's interesting. So you have one protein binding two different things, but do you have any idea for what? I said, no, I'm not an MD. I can't tell you for what. I mean, maybe I find somebody. So, but at that time, antibodies did not have a good reputation in general. So I helped to do a little bit of business development back in the 90s, Morphosys. We went to all the German big pharma companies. At that time, pharma was big in Germany. It's changed a bit because of certain reasons. And they're all chemists. So I could talk to them because I'm a chemist. But German chemists hate biology. I mean, it's a kind of historical thing. So when I told my chemist professor, I will go into molecular biology, he thought I'm nuts.
Right.
Because he said, are you crazy? You want to work with proteins? I mean, that is not science, right?
Right.
So I said, no, it's science. So, and the same reaction I got from pharma companies saying, oh, why should we work with you guys? So Morphosys was a young company. CAT was a bit bigger. You had Genentech, big already in the US, obviously. But in Europe, there was hardly anything. I mean, CAT and Morphosys, the pioneers in that. So we went there, suggested, so we can build antibodies against all kinds of targets you can't address with small molecules. And they said, oh, we don't believe in any of that. I said, why? They said, yeah, it's really simple. What does it cost for you to create a gram of antibody? And at that time, it was super expensive. And probably would be 100,000 euros or so, or even $1 million per gram, or 10 million, don't know. Nowadays, it's a bit cheaper, but at that time, it was just uncharted territory. So I said, look, that will be quite expensive. I mean, obviously, you don't need a gram per patient. You might use it for 1,000 patients or so. But they said, okay, it's super difficult to express that. Is it stable at room temperature? I said, yeah, but not over a prolonged period of time. So that does mean you can't store it somewhere. Yeah, you have to store it, frozen. Is it surviving this cycle and so on? That not every antibody does that. It depends a bit on. Oh, look, so it's extremely expensive. It's not stable. Can you put it in a pill? And I said, no, you can't, because if you swallow it, it's digested. I said, look, and then they said, oh, I mean, we went to Bayer, we went to Boehringer Mannheim at the time, and we did a small deal with them actually. So they were the only ones who listened a bit. But we went to Höchst, I mean, a company which is actually no longer existing, and they all said, they gave it in writing, forget it. Antibodies will never be a medicine. And obviously the US companies and the Swiss companies, Russian, so they believed much earlier in that. And they won the competition, because now look into the drug space, the blockbusters. Apart from the COVID vaccine, I think 70% are antibodies now. The point 30 years ago, nobody believed in that. Now, even not in an IgG. So when I came and said, look, that's an IgG, but I have some ideas to turn that into a smaller molecule, still a protein, but something which can bind two targets at the same time. They say, Guy, we don't even believe in an IgG. Why should we believe in a multi-specific antibody? So long story, but I was always a fan of this idea. And when I met Crescendo Biologics at the time, the management at the time, I said, look, they are building VHs, so not entire IgGs, but just the VH domain, which is sufficient to bind, actually, surprisingly. And they had a mouse, and you can, and other companies showed, if you have a stable, well-expressed VH, you can link it to other VHs, and you can easily generate a multi-specific molecule. And I said, this is perfect. You have the perfect platform to do multi-specifics. So I was super impressed by the technology platform. And And because I believed in that multi-specific, I mean, they didn't have any program at the time, but I said, oh, I will be in the board, and I will kind of push them into that direction. And then I was in the board for a year, and I tried to push, but I got this typical British response, oh, quite interesting idea, Peter. Yeah, we'll look into that. And the next board, I thought they would have looked into it, and they didn't do anything. And I did that 3 or 4 times. I was pretty frustrated. My partners were frustrated. There wasn't a real good application of the technology apart from something doing a VH in a cream, which was not a bad idea. And now it's in the clinic. But at that time, there was nobody, no acquirer who would pay money for a biotech company putting a protein in a cream.
Right.
So I had to complete it. So after some while, there was kind of the question, we need a different type of a CEO. Who can that be? We don't find somebody. We need to fund the company. And then they asked me, so Peter, you have done that at Morphosys, not at the CEO at the time, but you have created novel technologies, novel molecules. Can you envisage to become the new CEO? And I said, oh, I had done that at the time for 15 years. Not necessarily, but somebody had to do it. And it was actually the best time of my entire career. Right. So I moved to Cambridge, and I was so impressed and excited about the level of expertise. All the other companies at the, like F-Star at the Babraham, F-Star, Kymab, lots of really fantastic, impressive companies, people, excitement. So I basically restructured the entire company, started an old portfolio of multi-specifics, which is now in the clinic. And we're praying that there will be really good results coming out of that. But so I changed completely, was helping to do a big pharma deal with Takeda, which helped us to fund our own pipeline. And I did that for 4 or 5 years.
Yes.
I wanted to do it for 1 year initially.
Okay.
But in the end, it was 4 or 5 years. But I had a fantastic successor, the Harold, at that time, my CFO. And she was perfect to take over. I said, look, I done my job. I restructured it. We did a big funding round, a really big Series B, and company is a good stage now. So we have everything. We just need to go into the clinic, and that's a piece of cake. It isn't. It wasn't. It's still quite challenging to produce all that, and so to find a CMO to do everything and to plan for the clinical trials and all of that. So it was a lot of work still to do, but I thought I had done my job. I mean, I did the discovery, the novel mechanisms, up to the developability stage, and somebody else can take over and bring it to the clinic. And that was done by my successor, the Harold, and also really good people I found from Kymab, ex-CAT people. And the interesting thing was I came together with these former competitors of mine. I told you about the Morphosys story, and we were competing. We were ending up in court. Now, Kevin Johnson, at that time CTO of CAT, he brought us to court. I mean, they were, suing us because of the technology I co-invented. Yes. And I thought, when I meet these people in person, I knew all the names, obviously. John McCafferty and Kevin Johnson and Jane Osborne and all these really famous people. And when I met them, I was first a bit nervous. So what would they say about this bloody German coming in and trying to rebuild a British, antibody company? And I found out that we are like-minded. We are really like-minded people. And I really enjoyed it. I mean, that was fantastic. And I think that Crescendo Biologics is a huge success, and it will be a huge success. And based on this multi-specificity idea, novel mechanisms, so address problems in a completely novel way. Now, don't generate the 50s monospecific IgG. I mean, that's boring. I don't need to do that. Other people can do that. It's just me too. I want to have novel mechanisms, and that seems to work. So fingers crossed.
Exciting. And I'm interested, Peter. I mean, you've given us a really good picture of the different environments in which you ran businesses, and as you said, when you first took the step into that first diagnostics company, you didn't have a mentor. There wasn't a sort of training program available, and there really isn't today either. But I think you'd gone from running an R&D group in a technology that you'd been involved in inventing to then going and doing something very different and having to take on all that commercial and manufacturing responsibility. And then, have built on that over the years. I guess a couple of questions I have. How did you go about becoming a better CEO? And you mentioned that there was a lot of mistakes as part of that. And one of the things I've noticed is the mistakes get more expensive as they go along.
In hindsight, that's all a bit embarrassing.
Right.
So, and I have to say, I was probably an awful CEO, but there weren't a lot around, and I couldn't learn from anybody, even from my board members. I couldn't really learn. They didn't know either. I mean, these were old pharma guys, and it turned out, and we had some, consultants. Something I'm doing now too, but these consultants. I mean, we had some consultants like Boehringer Mannheim, and they wanted to tell us how to build a company, and it was not convincing. And I asked, so what did you actually do at Boehringer Mannheim? And said, oh, they're working on a certain machine, patient year testing machine. Oh, how long did you do that? Oh, 30 years. And what did you actually do? I tried to implement one parameter onto this machine.
Right.
And that was all you did. Yeah, that was all I did. So there was nobody who could tell us how to build an entire holistic company.
Yes.
I mean, that was simply not available. Here in the UK was a bit different because people like Kevin Johnson, they did that so many times that, you get so much experience doing it. So how did I do that? So I was quite embarrassed by lots of mistakes I did. And I'm so annoyed about myself that I'm processing that again and again and say, look, next time that must not happen. I mean, it must never happen again. So I learned hands-on by failure, essentially. And the point is, in hindsight, I would do things much different. I mean, I needed 10 years to build up this fully integrated diagnostic company up to commercialization and presence in lots of countries and even nearly profitable. But nowadays, I could do the same in 5,
right?
Because I would avoid many mistakes. So learning by doing, but I really missed a mentor who would bring that broad experience.
Yes.
And now I'm working with relatively young companies. Some take advice, and then I like to work with the people. I mean, they don't have to do it if it's essentially their decision. I would just say, look, if I would be in your shoes, I would do it like that.
Yes.
And sometimes I meet teams who are thankful and think about that, consider it, and maybe not doing it the same way. And sometimes I meet people who would say, no, we are not doing it like this and so on, and would not be responsive. And then I say, it's fine. I mean, you do it your style. It's just, I like to work with people jointly and develop something. And so I'm a bit picky with whom I work.
Yes.
Whether people would be willing to listen. And that doesn't mean they have to do it as I suggested. It's just maybe they find a better way. But I had the situation in the past working as a consultant. For instance, once I have written a business plan for a company in Germany, and they raised some money, and then they didn't do anything. I mean, I thought the CEO would write the business plan, but he kind of kept out of the process. So eventually I have written it, and the investors saw, oh, this is not from the CEO, that's from you, right? I said, oh, no, it's from the CEO and so on. Right. So what happened then, they got the money and they didn't do anything. So I called them up half a year later. And so I said, look, I had made this plan that you should have now this and this milestone. I said, no, we haven't started it. I said, why didn't you do that? They said, oh, I mean, we have now money in the bank. It's quite comfortable. And I said, yeah, but if somebody says, what about this milestone? Like the board. And they said, oh, in this case, we say that is Peter's plan. And it was unrealistic from the start.
Right, okay.
And I said, okay, good. I mean, they paid me some money, but I don't want to be in the situation that people say, oh, we just did what he said, and it's his fault if it fails. So that was a quite negative experience. So as a result, I'm a bit picky. And if I see, okay, people adapt it, or we jointly come to something, and then they execute it, it's fine. If not, I don't need to do it. I mean, financially, I wouldn't need to do it. Yeah. But it's fine. I mean, we part ways. I have to give you my input. Do whatever you do. Sometimes there are successful, but most of the times they're actually not.
Yeah. No, of course. And so you've worked now with lots of different leadership teams, and you see lots of different companies and things like that. And of course, you found your own way as a CEO. What do you think makes someone a really good CEO?
Oh, that's a $1 million question. They're really different styles. So
Yes, of
I
course.
was also working with companies where the CEO would say something and people would just execute it.
Right.
That's also something. It's not my style. I mean, these people can be hugely successful because they have a kind of natural feel for trends, or so it's more gut feel, and they would basically make a decision in the morning without really thinking about that, but
Right.
it's actually the right decision. That's not my way.
Right.
They can be super successful, but people basically, their teams just executing something also without questioning it. So the style which I developed was a kind of more a mutual agreement on that this is the right project, this is the right target, this is a project plan we can live with. These are ambitious but realistic milestones. And we jointly work, and that's how I try to do it, especially at Crescendo Biologics.
Right.
And for that, you need really people who are a bit critical. I mean, asking questions. Why should we do it like that? Isn't there another way? And I would really listen. We would sit together. I would listen, and we would try to come to a joint conclusion. I mean, sometimes you have to make an executive decision, and you have to make decisions. It's the worst thing as a CEO who can't make any decisions. So you have to make 20 decisions a day. But if it's about strategy, it's about targets, plans, I would always get the best available people in the room and discuss it. And then ideally they take over responsibility.
Right.
And I was really fortunate because I found so many experienced people in Cambridge, Phil Bland-Ward coming from Kymab, Theo Harold coming from Oxford, an Oxford company, and jointly we created something which in the end is successful.
Yes.
And that kind of a leadership, and then I get sometimes the feedback, oh, you are the only CEO who listens, or the only CEO who would also admit to make a mistake. I think that is something. It's especially in Germany, or my father has had a little company in the building construction business, and this generation, they would never ever admit they did a mistake. I mean, they would find all kinds of excuses and explanations. And I'm making mistakes, and I would say, "Oh, this was a wrong idea. I mean, we need to fix it. I mean, sorry about that, but do you have better ideas to fix it?" And that my team would give me the feedback. Oh, you're the only CEO we ever had who would be positive, would be encouraging, would say, "Oh, well done," would listen to me, and I could just show that my idea works. And that's a kind of a leadership style I kind of developed over nearly 3 decades.
Yes.
But initially I was not great.
No, but I think it's a steep learning curve at the start, isn't it? There's so much to get your head around. But your sort of approach then became gathering the right people first of all, and then directing them to the right questions, the right problems. Yeah. Okay. Interesting. And then my last question, Peter, and this may be something we've mentioned already, but if you were to go back and perhaps talk to yourself at the point of Morphosys starting, or maybe at the point of starting the diagnostics company, whatever's the most relevant, what's something you know now that you wish you knew then?
Yeah, I mean, what it takes to build a good team.
Okay.
What it takes to find really supportive investors, because I did many funding rounds. I had to do many funding rounds. And I also see companies I'm working with, and you need to have the right type of investor. And because I see that in situations where investors are quite different in their mentality, that this creates lots of problems in the board. So I think I would take more kind of focus on who are the best possible investors. I mean, usually don't have the choice, right? You take the money which is on the table. But I learned that it bites you later if you have investors. And for instance, even my father invested into my first company, and that was an awful situation because I told him, there's a 90% risk that you'll lose the money. And I understand that, I trust in you. But a year later, he started to ask every time we met, where's my money and what kind of return do I get? And you have this situation sometimes in companies. So try to find a coherent investor base. Ideally, investors with deep pockets like HBM or Sofinnova, investors I had also in Crescendo, Sofinnova, for instance, who would go not just the seed round or Series A, ideally also B or even C, crossover, whatever.
Yes.
And support you along the way. I have to say, for instance, somebody like Graziano Segezzi, I really benefited from his input, expertise, support in the board of Crescendo Biologics is still there. So, and you need investors like him really to build a successful company. But unfortunately, you hardly have the choice, especially as a startup. It was always difficult to raise money. It's a bit easier in UK than it is in Germany, but still, you take the money and then you regret it 2 years later because people would not come to the same conclusion and they would start to fight in the board, or you don't get the majority to sign a certain document. I mean, that is something I would do better. I mean, in hindsight, I also would say my diagnostic company was in the end successful, but it was a bit of a detour. If I would have started a competition to Morphosys with multispecifics, I think that would have been the better idea in hindsight. But unfortunately, I promised Simon Maroney when he found out I would think about starting a own company, I promised him not to start a competition, and I kept to my word.
Yes. Okay. Well,
but in hindsight, because diagnostic is an interesting field.
Yes.
But it's even harder to find investors.
For
diagnostic companies, and I found therapeutics always a bit more exciting. So I learned a lot. I learned also commercialization, all of that. But basically, my sweet spot is antibody engineering, discovery, but also bringing something up to a stage it can get into the clinic. I mean, that is the most exciting thing for me still.
Yeah, of course. I think that's a really valid point to end on. But thank you so much for joining us, Peter. It's been great to learn about your career, and thank you for sharing. And we wish you the best of luck.
Yeah, thanks. And also keen to hear your podcast, also with the others, and quite interesting interviews you had. So it's great to learn because you don't learn that from a LinkedIn profile. So it's much better to listen to what people actually experienced in their past.
Yes, there's what it says on the profile or on the CV, and then there's the story, isn't there? And those two things are not always the same thing.
Also about more difficult problems and times you had, which you wouldn't put into a CV.
Yeah, absolutely. No, thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you.
Thanks for listening. If you enjoyed the episode, please like and subscribe and share it with someone else you think will benefit. And for more podcasts, videos, blogs and insights, come follow me, Tom Froggatt, on LinkedIn, YouTube, Instagram, Medium or TikTok. See you next time.